Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Jose from microAPS.io, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make serverless deployments of FastAPI applications to AWS. So I see this question all the time. What's the best way to deploy a FastAPI application? The most cost effective, the simplest way, a way that it scales. And the reality is there are many different ways of doing this. If you shop around, there are tons of cloud providers that are going to provide cost-effective and scalable ways of deploying your FastAPI applications with varying degrees of complexity. AWS Serverless is just one of those ways of deploying a FastAPI application. It is going to be very cheap. You're going to pay only for what you use. And so unless you have a very popular website that you have some way of monetize, you won't have to pay really much money for a serverless deployment. And it's going to scale automatically. So you won't have to worry about infrastructure at all. Now, to make serverless deployments on AWS, you're going to need a few things. You will need an AWS account. You will need to have a user on that AWS account with access to the AWS API. So you will have to generate access keys for that user. I'm going to show you how to make the deployment in two ways, with traditional IAM users and also with users created with the Identity Center, the IAM Identity Center. And actually, I'm going to walk you through the process of setting up the Identity Center, adding users, and configuring API access with the CLI for those users. If you have traditional users in IAM, feel free to use those users for deployments as well. I'm going to show you in the video how to do that. Now, you're going to need also a Node.js runtime with NPM. So we're going to use the serverless framework, which is one of the easiest ways to deploy serverless applications to AWS. I'm going to leave all the details of the documentation in the comments to the video. But the important bit is it is a Node.js application, so you will need to have Node.js installed in your machine. And so you can come to the Node.js website and see here how to install it for your machine. It is platform dependent, so follow the instructions for the operating system you have. So you install Node.js, npm, make sure you can run npm to install packages. The next thing you're going to need to do is install serverless. So npm install serverless. I'm going to show you here in the terminal how to do it. So we're going to do npm install serverless. And then we're going to do this also for two plugins. We're going to need two plugins here to work with the serverless framework to make these deployments. So we're going to need beta credentials, which is what is going to allow us to make deployments with users from the Identity Center in AWS. You will see all the reasons for that later in the video. And we're going to need also serverless Python requirements, which is going to allow us to package our dependencies in a nice way in our serverless application. So with those things installed, the only thing that is missing here is the AWS CLI version 2 if you're going to use users from the Identity Center. So if you have those users in your account already, you probably already have access with the CLI version 2. If you want to set up those users the way I'm going to show you in the video, you will need to come to this page here on AWS and follow the instructions to install the AWS CLI version 2. If you have any issues with any of these steps in the process of installing and configuring your environment, reach out to me, leave your questions in the comments. I'll be happy to help you troubleshoot these problems. Now, I think that is enough introduction for this video. We have a lot to do, so let's get on with it. Some suggestions I would make is definitely follow along with the instructions. The process, once everything is set up, is really a lot simpler than it seems. The deploying an application to AWS Serverless, in the end, is a matter of running one command, very simple command. You will see how it works. And so follow along, and if you get something deployed, even if it is a very simple application, I encourage you to post the link to your API in the comments to the video so that we can see what you're doing. And that's a way, to get your application out there and get people to play around with it. And if you like this video, please make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share with anyone that might find it useful. I'm going to give away a free copy of my book, Microservice APIs, among all the subscribers to the video. So I'll select a winner. It's going to be an ebook, so I'll send an ebook access to the code. So make sure you subscribe, like the video, and post your application in the comments. Thank you, and let's get on with it. All right, so I'm here in the terminal, and we've got a very simple starter project here. So if I do a list on the folder where I am at, we have a pipe project file with the dependencies that we're going to use here, and we have a very simple FastAPI application in the server.py file. We also have the serverless.yaml file that we're going to use later to do the serverless deployment. Let me walk you through the stuff that we have here in this pre-populated project. So in terms of dependencies, we have it very simple. We only have FastAPI and Ubicon. It's just simple as that to run a very simple FastAPI application. I've pinned the version of Python to 3.10, but you can change that when you clone the repo. You can set it to any version of Python you want to work with, maybe higher than 3.7. That's probably the minimum you need. And in the server.py file, we have our simple FastAPI application. And so we have two endpoints. The first of them is hello. You can think of it as a kind of hello world endpoint. This is just to make sure that we can test the application easily to make sure it's working. And then we have an env endpoint, and this is to test the environment variables that we're going to set throughout the project. So I'm going to show you two ways to feed configuration into the application. And so this env endpoint is going to help us test and verify that the environment is correctly set up. So that's all we've got. The first thing we're going to do, there's a prefix here, and you're going to, once we are talking about the serverless deployment, you're going to make sense of it. We're going to leave it like that for now, and then we don't have to change it later, but we'll make sense later. So what we're going to do, we're going to install the dependencies first. So we're going to say poetry install. So that's all installed now, and then we're going to activate the environment. So poetry shell, and now we're going to run the application. So we're going to say ubicon server reload. Okay, so that's the application running. Now we go to the browser and we say localhost 8000 docs, and that's our application. So if we hit the hello endpoint, that's our hello message. That means the application is working. It's going to be very simple to troubleshoot the application in AWS Serverless with this endpoint because it's so simple. It doesn't have any dependencies. It's not doing anything complicated. So if it works, it means the application is running correctly on AWS. And then we have this env endpoint. So if we hit the endpoint now, we get this message that the environment hasn't been set. So that's very important information. It means we are not passing any configuration through the environment. We can change that. So if we stop the server with Control-C, we will run the command. So if you do Control-A, the cursor goes to the beginning of the line. We can say the name of the variable is this. So we copy that, we paste it here, and we say env variable is FastAPI local, for example. So we run the server like that, and we hit the endpoint again, and we have the variable now set. So what we're doing here is we are passing environment here. In this command, we are passing the environment to the application directly through the command. Another thing we could do is export env variable equals this. So that's also a perfectly valid way of setting up the environment. That's how you would do normally. If you have environment set up that way and you wanted to override a certain environment variable, you can use this command. This option is going to override whatever you have set in the environment this way. So right, that's the application working. And now we want to see how we deploy this application. And the first thing we actually need to do, we need to change the application slightly. So let me walk you first through the serverless configuration file to understand what changes we need to make. So this is a very simple template for deploying applications to AWS Serverless. We have the definition of the service, the name of the application we're deploying. Here we're calling it FastAPI Serverless. In other cases, it could be payments, it could be orders service, it could be publication service, whatever makes sense for the application you're deploying. And then we want to say here, there's a configuration that says package individually true. So it doesn't apply in this case, but if we had multiple applications defined within this folder and we were deploying all of them with this file, so imagine you have something like a monorepo with two services and you want to deploy both of them at the same time with this deployment file, then what this is going to do is says package each service individually. So we have the same code base, but I want to deploy them separately as different packages. So that's all it's doing. And then we have the provider configuration here. So the serverless framework traditionally has provided support for different serverless providers. So you could deploy to GCP, AWS, Azure, any other provider. Since version 4, they are changing that to focus on AWS. So if you're using versions lower than 4, you can still use that. You can still deploy to other providers. Of course, as long as that version isn't maintained, you won't be able to. New features are released. You may lose support and compatibility with those features. But so far, that's what we would do, right? We would do provider. We are deploying to AWS. We define the runtime. For me, that's going to be 3.10. You specify whichever runtime you are running the application with. The timeout. This is we're going to deploy this serverless function as an API. So it's going to connect with AWS API Gateway. When we deploy something with AWS API Gateway, the maximum timeout is 30 seconds, so we can't put anything higher than that. If you want a higher timeout, you will have to change your deployment model. You may not want to deploy to Lambda. So Lambda is only for those functions that are, they're going to respond fast and they're going to execute fast within 30 seconds. I mean, 30 seconds is pretty much sufficient, should be sufficient for most application needs. Unless you have some sort of machine learning something, then you would deploy differently. The AWS region where you want to deploy, for me, that's going to be EU West 1, which is Ireland. You can specify some other region. The stage, so we have here the possibility of specifying the deployment environment. So obviously different companies are managing environments differently. Some organizations have different AWS accounts for different environments. The serverless framework gives you the possibility to deploy different environments within the same account with the same file. So we would just have to specify a different environment here, staging, production, any other environment, and it will deploy to a different Lambda. The default value is dev here. And then we have two plugins that we're going to need. So the first one is Python requirements. So what this is going to do, when we deploy to AWS Serverless, the way it deploys is, what Serverless is going to do here is going to get all of our code, is going to put it into a zip file, is going to upload the zip file to S3, and then the Lambda is going to pull the code from that S3 bucket. And this S3 bucket is going to be created by the serverless framework as well. So you don't have to worry about any of those things. But the zip file has to contain everything, including the dependencies. And that zip file can have only have a maximum size. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'll put it in the description of the video. I'll put these details. What happens with dependencies? They add a lot of size to the disk. There's a lot more files. Sometimes they come with data. And so when you put all the dependencies, they may be bigger than the maximum size allowed for the zip file. And so what the serverless framework is going to do is going to create a Lambda layer that has the dependencies, and then hopefully that those dependencies are still within the limit of the file size for the layer, and then you can deploy the application on top of that. Basically, it's just going to handle the dependencies in a nice way for you. You don't have to worry about that any more than the plugin is here. Dependencies are going to be put together with the application. And then serverless beta credentials. So I'm going to show you two ways of deploying the application. The first one, we are not going to need this plugin, but for the second way I'm going to show you, we're going to need them. We will come to that later. And then there is some kind of custom configuration here. And so that is how we are going to manage in this case, simply the requirements. So we're going to tell the framework, we're going to use Poetry for that. We're going to tell it to use Docker to package the dependencies so that we are installing them in a controlled environment that fits with the runtime of AWS. So for that, the Docker image we are going to use is the AWS Serverless Framework image, which is or Serverless Application Model base image for Python. So it contains everything we need to run Python correctly on AWS Serverless. We are also going to ask it to do the image, slim image. So no additional dependencies, nothing fancy because we don't need it, and it's going to only take a space that we could need for other dependencies or things we need within the application. And we are passing some configuration for the serverless requirements layer. So we're going to call it the layer, we're going to call it like this. FastAPI backend requirements layer, description for it, their runtimes. So this is pretty much standard stuff. You can copy these directly to the projects you want to deploy yourself independently. And then we have the functions. So like I said, you could have a monorepo with multiple functions. In this case, we have only one. And this configuration here is going to ensure that if you have multiple functions, they're going to be packaged separately. So what we need to tell the serverless framework is what files we want to include in the zip file. So, so if you have for example, SQLite database locally, if you have some heavy files, data that you're using to run your application locally with fixtures or something, you don't want to include any of that. So what we're telling it is include all the Python files, include the poetry log file, the by project toml, but don't include the package JSON, don't include the package log if we have those files. Don't include anything under the serverless folder, which is where the serverless framework is going to include the zip files and everything. Don't include the node modules. If the npm dependencies are installed locally, don't include it. If you have a local virtual environment, don't include it. If you have a data folder, don't include any of that. So with this exclamation mark, we say don't include any of those things. And then we specify the handler. So that's the entry point to the application. So look at the configuration here. It says the Lambda has to be triggered with an event, right? It's event-based, not event-driven, but event-based deployment or execution model. And so that the Lambda isn't continuously running. It has to be triggered by something. In this case, we're going to say it's going to be triggered by HTTP events that obviously are coming from an API gateway with any method under any path. And so the path is going to be relative to the URL of the Lambda. We're going to get of the API gateway. We're going to get the URL after deploying. And we're going to say that so any path within this URL, just pass it directly to the application, and our handler is going to take care of it to map it to the right FastAPI controller. We are also telling what requirements layer. So we could have multiple requirements layers defined here, right? So this is one layer. We could have, this is a list. We could have some other layers. So we could specify those different layers here. And then we pass some environment to the application here. This is just one way of passing environment variables. I'm going to show you where they show up in the application once it is deployed. And then I'm going to show you a different way of passing configuration to the application. This is the simplest way of doing it. We need to do one thing. So you see here the handler, that is the entry point to the application. We don't have a handler in the application. So if we go back to the server.py file, there is no handler here. So we have to create one. And actually FastAPI obviously is not designed to run in serverless by default. So we need to install another dependency that is going to allow us to do that. So coming back to the terminal, we're going to say poetry add mangum. All right. So that's the dependency we're going to use to run the application. And then we're going to say handler equals mangum. And we have to pass the application object, so server. And so we input that. It's not picking it up because it's not pointing to the right environment. So to configure the environment for PyCharm, we say which Python. We copy this. We come back here. We say add interpreter. And then we say existing environment. Click on the three dots. Paste this here. Click OK. OK. And then it loads the environment, the virtual environment. That's loaded, and then we can say now input mangum. All right, so that's our handler. So mangum is a framework that is going to what it does is it knows how to map the events from the API gateway to a specific controller here. And so it's going to work like a FastAPI application on the Lambda. All right, so because we can't run UVCon or those things on the Lambda, right? So it's gonna be done this way. The handler is gonna be the thing that maps events to our controllers. All right, so now to do the deployment, it's gonna be, this case is gonna be very simple. We're gonna say serverless. We're gonna say npx. SLS is the shortcut for serverless. So SLS deploy. I want to show you one thing you can do. If you had multiple serverless files, so in this case we have only one, serverless.yaml. If you had multiple, you can specify the file name by doing --config and the file name. So like that. And then we're going to say stage is dev, and that's everything we need to do. So this is going to work for me because I have a default AWS profile configured in my machine, right? So if I call the AWS API with the AWS CLI, if I do AWS S3 list or something, I don't have to pass the profile because I have a default one. If you had a profile, then you would say AWS profile and you put your profile here, or you simply export that in your environment. You say AWS profile equals whichever name you have for it. So this is the command, and so if we trigger the deployment here, it's gonna do the packaging first. It's gonna create a CloudFormation stack. So it's gonna do all of those things for us. So any changes to the application, they are traceable on CloudFormation, and we can as well, get the CloudFormation template and roll it out to other environments or accounts if we wanted to. All right, so the deployment went through, and this is our URL for the API gateway. And so you see this dev here, that's the environment. So that's why we deployed the application with this prefix for the OpenAPI Swagger UI for FastAPI. Without this, it wouldn't load. So that's the only reason we have this here. Obviously, if we're going to deploy to different environments, we want to have different prefixes here pulling from an environment. We are doing only dev here now, so it's okay to hard code it. And so this is our API gateway URL. So we can come here to the browser. Let's open a new tab and we say docs. And that's our FastAPI application. So we can say hello, that's working. We can say env. And that is our configuration that we passed in the file, right? So if we go to the serverless file, this is the value we passed, and so it's correctly passed to the deployment. Now let me show you on the AWS account what it looks like. All right, so I'm here in the console, and so we're gonna go to Lambda, AWS Lambda service, and I have a bunch of Lambdas here. So we're gonna look for one that is serverless, and it's this one here. So it's been deployed 3 minutes ago. So this is the Lambda, and the configuration, on this configuration tab, we have everything we specified in the file actually, right? So we have the timeout, maximum memory. You can configure that as well if you want to have more memory, things like that. And then we have something here for environment variables. Now this is how we passed the variable just now. So we specified the variable in the file, and it comes here. We can change this value here now, and we can say something else. We save it, and if we call this endpoint now, it changed, right? So we changed the value, and the Lambda can pick up those values. Now I want to show you a different way of doing deployments. So what I've done here is a deployment with traditional AWS credentials. So there is this file here on your machine, AWS config. And so config contains your profiles. And traditionally we have profiles that represent users on IAM, and they contain an AWS Access Key ID and an AWS Access Key Secret. And we put, traditionally what we would do is, I'll show you here actually. So I have some of those users. So if we go here to IAM, so we search for users, and this user, for example, has a couple of access keys. Now those keys are never changing. Once you issue the keys, the credentials are there forever. What's the problem with this? If you leak those keys, somebody gets access to your account, because there's nothing else you have to do to access the AWS API on your account. if those keys, if somebody for a brute force attack or something similar, they manage to figure out what the values of your keys are, then they would get access to your AWS account just as well. And so AWS has been for a long time telling us not to do things this way. Those permanent keys are not the way of interacting with the AWS API. What you should do instead is use temporary credentials. Now, nowadays, that is very easy. So if you go to, it is IAM Identity Center. So you go here. If you don't have that enabled on your account, you will get a view that says enable for your account. It will ask for some configuration. My recommendation is configure it to allow organizations, so to be able to have other accounts linked to your main account. That could be useful sometime in the future. So once you configure that, you will get this dashboard and you can create users. So I have one user created here. I'm going to walk you through the process of creating another user. So let's say we create another one, which is Jose Test. And then for the email, we're going to say hello@microapis.io, hello@microapis.io. And the name is going to be Jose Aro Peralta. We're going to click next. I have a group already defined in my Identity Center. I'm not going to select it. I'm going to show you how to create one. So we click next. We add the user. All right. So now I'll have to go to the my email account to verify the user. I'll do that in a moment. Let's create another group. So we're going to say create group, and we're going to give it a name, admin test. And we're going to link it to Jose Test. And so we create the group. All right, so that's the group, admin test. And now we're going to go to permission sets. All right, so we have one defined here that I created before. We're going to create another one. And this is going to be a predefined permission set with administrator access. You can create other profiles, and you can even create your custom permission sets. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to call it admin access test. And my recommendation, I mean, sessions, you know, if they last 1 hour, that means on the CLI, for example, you will have to log in every hour on the dashboard, on the console as well. I would put it for 12 hours, maybe. I think it's more convenient for 8 hours, a full working session. So we click next, and well, this is not the time to submit feedback. We're in the middle of a tutorial. So, all right, so that's our permission set administrator access test. Now we're going to go to accounts. So we're going to click here. We're going to say assign users or groups. We're going to click on admin test, which is the new group we are setting up. We click next. And we're going to give it this permission set that we defined before to get access to the account. We click next, and we confirm this configuration. Now AWS is setting this up for us, and now we have our permission set linked to a new group that has access to this account. And so if we come to the group here, the admin test group, we have a user bound to it, and we have access to our AWS account. And so this is the recommended way of accessing our accounts, because that means we can't use a permanent access key to access the AWS API. We have to generate new credentials every time. So the way we're going to get access to this profile that we created here, we go to the terminal. And by the way, you will need AWS CLI version 2 to do this. So we say AWS SSO Jose Test. So AWS SSO login profile Jose Test. That is the profile we created just now, and that gives us access to the account with administrator access permissions. Actually, before we do that, we have to configure the CLI to have this profile set up. So we will say AWS configure SSO, and so the recommended thing here is that you give it a name. But because we're going to work with AWS Serverless, and there's a glitch in the plugin that if you have a session name specified here, it won't work. So we leave it blank. It's just for the serverless deployment, all right? Otherwise, if you're going to have this for a different purpose, you can give it a name. Now, the start URL, the easiest way to pick up that URL is you can ask your account admin to get it. But you see, we got this email to join the account. So if we click on it, we accept the invitation, obviously, to be able to log in with it. We have to set the password. So let's get a suggested password here. So if we go back to the email, we have this URL here. So that's the URL that goes here. That's the URL we're going to use to log into a new session with this account. So we click enter, and then we have to specify the region. So the region is simply the region where we created this configuration. So I'm accessing the IAM Identity Center from Ireland. So the region here is EU West 1. And so that creates the configuration. Now I've got a prompt in the browser, which I'm going to put here. And so, when you log in with the CLI, it's going to open this prompt here, which is for you to confirm access to the CLI. It's telling you someone is requesting access to this. Can you please confirm that the access can be granted? And so you confirm the access, and now we have our we have a session active here to access the API with that profile. And so the configuration so far has been for the Identity Center, how to call the Identity Center to log in and create the session. And now is the default configuration to access the API. So in my case, I do deployments to EU West 1. So that's going to be the default region where I want to manage resources. And then I want, of course, the output in JSON and the a name for the profile. I'm going to call it Jose Test, so that I know which one it is and I can delete it later easily. And so that's all, right? So there is a suggestion there how to test the command is working. All I want to show you is to create a new session. You do this: AWS SSO login profile, in this case Jose Test. And so if you do that, you're gonna get prompted with this same tab that we had here to confirm that we can grant access to that API call. That's all. Then the session is active. Now, if you want to do deployments, if you're doing things correctly in your AWS account and you have your users, your access configured this way, and you want to do deployments with this type of access, you want to do serverless deployments, you have to do something different. So you're gonna get this environment variable here. So we go back to the serverless command, and you're gonna pass it this variable. You're gonna say AWS SDK load config true. And so this is gonna leverage the plugin, the beta serverless, which one was it? Serverless beta credentials. So this is a plugin that makes the serverless framework work with this type of accessing the AWS API with temporary credentials. And so we're going to say, yeah, we're going to use that type of credential, and then the deployment command, and now we have to pass the profile. This is not the default profile. Now we have Jose Test. So we can do the same thing and do the deployment. Should be AWS profile. And by the way, to make sure that the deployment is actually working, let us change the environment variable here. Let's say serverless deployment with SSO. All right. And so we can do the deployment again. All right, so the deployment went through, and now we can go back to the serverless UI here, and we can the FastAPI UI. And so if we call this endpoint again, we have serverless deployment with SSO. So the deployment actually worked. Now, what if we're passing configuration like this for the application? If we had to pass something sensitive like an API key or some secrets or something, this is really not the safest way of doing it, because this is in code. This is going to be committed to your repository. It's going to end up on GitHub or something, and everybody who gets access to it could see it. And if there is a breach or something, it's really bad. So that's not how you want to manage sensitive configuration and how you want to feed it to the application. For that, you have different ways of doing it. One way I'm going to show you here is with AWS Secrets Manager. So the first thing we would have to do is come back here to our AWS account. So we come here, click on Administrator Access. That is going to give us access to the console. I'm going to show you how to create one manually, just for illustration here. So we go to Secrets Manager, and we are going to create a new value here, a new secret. So we're going to say, you have some options for integration with AWS services. This is not for an integration like that. This is going to be a plain and simple secrets store, and it's gonna have some key value pairs. The only key value pair we want to have is this one. And we're gonna say super secret config. And so if this is a sensitive value, it's gonna live on this store, and nobody else can have access to it except through your AWS account. We're gonna call it dev FastAPI serverless test, and we're gonna click next. Of course, you can put some descriptions, some tags, just keeping it simple here. You can have automated rotation of the encryption values and everything, so that it is super secure. We're gonna keep it simple for now here. So next, and this is our setup, store, refresh, and this is our secret. So we're gonna access this from the serverless deployment manifest. We're gonna do it this way. Where we have custom configuration here, we're gonna say secrets, and we're gonna say SSM. SSM somehow stands for AWS System Manager or something similar. And so we say this is gonna come from AWS System Manager parameter store. So AWS reference Secrets Manager. So you just copy that like that, right? AWS System Manager all the way to the Secrets Manager service, and then the name of the secret store, which is this. So dev FastAPI serverless test, like that. And then we close this curly brace. So if you have different secrets, then you're just gonna reference them that way. This stays the same. Everything here all the way to this point stays the same. AWS System Manager, AWS Reference Secrets Manager, and the rest is your secrets name, okay? Your secret store. So we're gonna say we're gonna pull secrets from here, and the way it's gonna happen is in the environment here. We're gonna say $curly brace self. So it's a reference from something within the document. Custom. So it's this property here, custom. You see custom has secrets. This is like a dictionary in Python, right? So custom secrets, and then env variable, which is the name we gave to the parameter here. So if we retrieve the secret value, env variable is the name of the key. So that's all we need to do if we want to pass secret configuration to our service. And this is a very convenient way, because everybody has access to the store. We can collectively maintain that store. We can access it from multiple services as well. So it's one place to manage this configuration securely. And so it has this value, super secret config. We're gonna do the deployment again with this configuration with the temporary credentials, which is the way we should do it. So we hit the deployment. That's it, deployment went through. So we can come back to the Swagger UI of the API gateway. And so we click execute. And that's our secret pulled from the secrets store, and the Lambda correctly configured. So that's all. That's if you want to do deployments with AWS Serverless, it is really simple if you use this serverless framework. There's a lot more you can do with it. We can include configuration with permissions to access other AWS services. I'll leave that for another video. I think this one is long enough for now. So, this is all you need to know to make simple deployments with AWS Serverless using the serverless framework. In another video, I'll show you how to give permissions to this Lambda to access other services like AWS SES, the simple email service, or to access certain buckets and things like that. For now, you've learned how to set up everything with the serverless file, how to make the deployment, and how to feed configuration securely. That's all for now. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like this video, leave a comment, like and subscribe. And if you go through the tutorial, you repeat all the steps yourself and something isn't working, leave me your questions in the comments and I'll help you out with whatever thing isn't working. All right, so that was everything. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel, make a comment. If you're interested in learning about other topics related to FastAPI, Python, or APIs or web development, please leave your suggestions in the comments. Share this video with anyone who might benefit from it, your colleagues, your friends or family. And if you want to learn more about API and web development in general, or working with Python or API security, check out my website, learn.microapis.io. I'm currently working on a whole series of courses about API and web development. I'm going to be uploading them very soon. And so if you want to learn more about these topics, check out the page. And if you have suggestions or you wish me to create courses on specific topics, leave your suggestions in the comments and I'll see what I can do. Thank you so much and see you soon.